Welcome back, guys. Today I wanted to share a project where I made a leather cutting knife using this file that I found at the thrift store. I didn't use any dimensions or plans for this project. It was a little bit off the cuff, something I just wanted to try. I based this angle off of sort of how the file felt in my hand and what I thought would work as I held it and looked at it. I cut this angle and ended up deciding that it was a little too shallow and I needed something a little steeper. So I came back and I ended up cutting it again after this to get something that I felt would work a little bit better. I probably could benefit from using more plans in my life, but sometimes you just get a project in your head and you just kind of want to go for it and have the freedom to just be creative and try what you think works best for you. And that's sort of what I did with this knife here. Since I have such a brilliant creative brain, I thought that I would use a magnet to hold this knife while I brought it to the grinder. As it turns out, magnets are attracted to metal grinders as well. So as soon as I tried putting this on the belt, I felt that magnet suck right down onto the platen underneath the belt, and I could tell right away this probably isn't going to be the best solution. Guess I'm not as clever as I thought. I came back and tried a few different ways to see if I could get those lines ground out of the file. Finally settled on using a block of wood to put even pressure across the file and try and get everything cleaned up. After getting everything cleaned up, I brought it back in the garage and got my slide bevel out and used that to mark where I thought I wanted the knife bevel to end. And again, this is just an estimate. And I used this line to start with and ended up actually going a little further with the bevel than the line, but it was pretty close. I had hoped to have more footage of grinding in this bevel, and it turns out my camera just didn't want to focus. I tried a lot of times, and I actually recorded a lot of footage that I ended up having to get rid of, so I apologize for that. But it was a little bit of a tedious task getting that bevel ground in there with my grinder. My big grinder is not made for making small knives, and it's probably not the most ideal tool for that, but it's what I have, and it worked okay for this project. I thought I would go ahead and start flattening the bevel out and getting to where I have an edge on this blade, but after starting, I thought I better wait till after I quench. I don't want too thin of an edge as I heat treat this, because I don't want to overheat that point of that blade. Here's my makeshift forge. I have a forge somewhere. We recently moved and I was not able to locate it for this project, so a weed burner on top of the camp chef is what worked for me this time. Just adding a little bit of heat to this oil to try and get it sort of preheated so that the quench isn't too drastic. And then I go ahead and heat up the knife, and you'll see what I'm talking about with having too fine of an edge here. I actually didn't notice this until I was watching the video back, but when I go to quench and move from the heat to the oil, you can see the very tip of my blade kind of cools down a little bit and goes off color. So I'm afraid that the tip of my blade is not as hard as I wanted it to be. And of course I didn't see this till after I recorded everything and came back and was editing this video. But it seemed to work okay for me, for what I'm using this knife for. Doing a little tempering here in the oven to bring the hardness down a bit so that it's a little bit tougher of a blade and not too brittle. I just did 300 degrees in the oven for about 2 hours, let it cool down so I could pick it up with my bare hand. I decided to go ahead and acid etch this blade. I just like the dark look of the acid etched blade and the contrast that it provides with the sharpened bevel. And it did make it easier for me to kind of see the lines as I sharpened this blade. So I recommend it if you're into that kind of look. Now I go ahead and start to sharpen the blade and get everything flattened out. I run it up on these diamond stones from extra coarse to extra fine. And I start on the back of the blade to try and get it completely flat. So I kind of approach this the same way you might approach sharpening a wood chisel, which seemed to work for me, but it did take quite a bit of time. The better you are on the grinder, the less time you're going to have to spend flattening everything out. And it did take me some time because I probably could have done better on the grinder. But you can see I slowly get everything flattened out on the tip of that blade, and then I can start to work on the bevel on the other side. Now the extra fine diamond stone is not as fine as it gets, so these aren't mirror polished, but it was able to get a very sharp point on there. I know that I could find other diamond stones that are finer, and also there are many Japanese stones, sharpening stones, that you can take this up to a very fine polish. But I think this works for my purposes, so I went ahead to the strop. I didn't put any polishing compound on this, it's just plain leather. It's such a fine edge that I didn't think it needed anything. I decided to wrap a small piece of deer skin around this, just as a nice kind of supple handle to help as I use it. And it gave me a good chance to try the knife out for the first time. I admit my skiving here is unimpressive, and I'm going to need some practice determining the best way to do this. I didn't really make this knife for skiving, but it is sharp enough to do it, and I think with a little practice I can get to where this is a pretty good tool for it. I didn't want to have any threads or anything like that on this knife. I just want it to be really simple, something I could easily slide on and off of the knife for sharpening or doing whatever I need to do with it. So I ended up settling on just using some contact cement to wrap this deer skin around the knife. I was a little worried about squeeze out from the glue getting on the leather underneath or getting on the knife, so I used a hacksaw blade instead, just to get that bond for that glue. And then I went ahead and slid the knife in there. I knew now that there wasn't a lot of squeeze out, so I hammered it on the knife as well. Let that dry for a while, cleaned it up a bit. So I think it turned out pretty good. It's definitely sharp and cuts through the leather really well. We'll see how well it holds an edge over time as I do projects. I know there's some things I could have done differently to improve this build, and I'll certainly do that if I build another one. And hopefully this provided some insight for those of you who would want to make something similar. And you can do it better than I did it and find something that works for you. But it was a fun project, and I think I'm going to enjoy using this knife.